Hey guys, Ben here, Aldo here.
Hi, everyone.
Today we're going to, we're going to go through the basics a bit. There are still some people who find it difficult to understand the basics. So we're
Yeah, like
basically,
me. So please.
yeah. So we're basically going to go through use state, a bit of props. We're going to create like two components. What we're basically going to do is we're going to learn how to create a state which holds an array of multiple items and render these out in the UI. Now, each item would also have a key, which would be equal to a Boolean, which with that Boolean, you would know how to control any status it can hold. So if it's a movie, you can favorite the movie, unfavorite the movie. If it's an email, you can mark it as read, as unread, right? You can do multiple things with that just one Boolean. So that's what we're going to do today. And yeah, I
Yeah,
guess we can dive right into it.
yeah. Sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so I'm thinking we'll do movies today, right?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
do some movies with titles of the
Mhm,
movies.
mhm.
Maybe if the movie it's a favorite one or not.
Okay,
Maybe later on add the price if you want.
okay, cool. So the first thing we have to start with is actually we'll start with an input, right? So we can actually give our new movie a name. Well, I just want to clarify the screen currently has nothing. If I would just say ASDFGH or whatever, save this, and you can see it's simply in the middle. We're using the basic styles from Create React App. We really didn't do anything except for cleaning up the application.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the first thing we will do, we will create an input. It will be of type text, right? It would have a certain value and it would have an on change. Now, most of you already know what these two do, so I won't really go in depth about that. But yeah, Aldo, can you import our use state hook and create a state for our input?
So yes, I think I need to import. Let me see a few things. React and maybe use state
Yeah,
from React. I'm okay?
yeah, you're okay. I just want to let everyone know in the newest version of React, React 17.0.1, I think, you don't need to import React anymore. So you can now
Oh,
simply do import use state from React.
that's
That's
great.
it. Yeah, that's awesome. So now that you've imported state, can you create a state for the input field?
Okay, let me see. We don't have hard coded any any data, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't need data at the moment. We are going to create data.
Okay, so
Yeah,
then we need to do a use state for the name of the movie.
just for the input field.
Okay, if you can lead me a little bit.
Okay, so the input field has a value and an on change. Now the on change needs to set the data into a state, while the value would be actually receiving that same data from that same state, right? So if I would say const, and I would say we would have an empty array at the moment is equal to use state,
Okay, yes.
which we've just imported. Now this empty array receives two values. So the first value would be the one that actually holds the value. So let's say the input field. And the second value in the array is what we will be calling to update this value. Usually you name it with set. So we would say
Set
set input field, right?
with
Now,
camel case.
yes, exactly. Now use state, it receives an initial value. So in this case, it will be an empty string. And then when doing at the input, I would say that the value is equal to the input field that we just created. So what now happens is that when the component will mount, the app will mount, at the initial mount, this will be equal to this
Empty.
empty string. So even if I
Mhm.
would put here, for example, Aldo or
Yeah.
Ben or both,
Mhm.
then the input would show Aldo, comma, Ben on mount only. Now that we have the on change, we will receive something that's called an event. And with that event, we can set the input field, which is the state we've created, and we would say that e.target.value. Now, what exactly is e.target_value? If I actually console log this, okay, if I'll console log this before setting state, I will make it clear for you guys. So I'm just going to console log the event, because the input when changing, so on change is basically an event. So when changing, it receives that event from the input, and now I'm going to open my console in the browser. So yeah, this should be fine. Now, when typing in the input field, I'll type Q, W, E, R, T. As you can see, while typing, the input field doesn't really change, because right now state is empty, which is equal to its value, and we don't actually change the state. But when we're actually typing, so we're console logging this object. As you can see, this object has many, many properties. And you can see, this whole object is the event, right? So you can see, if you open the target, you would have many more properties. Eventually, inside this target, we can find value, which will hold the value of our input. So when I say console log, like say e.target.value, and I would save this, right? Then while typing, let's say I type 1, then you can see I received 1 in the console. If I type 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so this is how we receive the value we are typing. So instead of console,
But just a single event, isn't it? Just a single event. It's not concatenating the whole thing right now.
yeah, so if I would set it to state and the value would be received from state, then when typing, we would have the previous value with the new typed character, right? So if I would now actually say, instead of console logging, we would have set input field, right? And if I save this, then now you can see, well, we won't console log it, but I will actually do this under the state, so you can see what's happening there. So I will
Mhm.
console log just our state. And now when typing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the input actually is updating. And you can see that on the initial mount, our state was an empty string. And then each time we typed, the state updated with the previous value, including the new value, right?
So the use state function kicks
Mhm.
in full in a full way. So right now we are storing the data that it's in the set input field, and
Mhm.
it's stored and updated in the input field thanks to the use state.
Yes, exactly. Now, it's important to mention that state is not persistent, which means that if you would
Yeah.
refresh or close the browser, any data stored in the state would vanish. So just to show an example, I will hit refresh. You can see I have nothing in my console. The input is now empty, which basically means that the state is empty. I can even show you using my components, right? This you can get in the Firefox extension store or the Chrome extension store. So it's called React DevTools. And
DevTools.
yeah, just by clicking app, I can see I have one state which is currently empty. Again, if I would type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you can see how the state actually updates with the typed value. And again, if I'll refresh, the state is empty. So that is state. Now, we're going to use this input field to create a movie, right? We're going to use it for a movie name and add it to a list of multiple movies. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to proceed or?
Well, so then, yes, maybe you could lead a little bit more.
Okay,
Thanks.
okay. So we have this one input field controlled by the state. I'm actually going to create another state called const all movies, and it's going to be with set all movies. it's going to be equal to use state. Now, when I want a group of multiple items where each item has the same structure, not the same value, that's where we can use an array. And then each item would be an object representing the movie. So in this case, our movie, it's going to have two key values. Okay, so it's going to be an object with a movie title, and then we're going to have another property called is favorite. So that's going to hold the boolean of true and false. Okay, so as I mentioned, the movies is going to be initially an empty state, sorry, an empty array. And if I would say I would have a button, and that button I would say add movie, just to save, and you could see it now in the UI. Now what I would do is that when I click this button, I want uh, the value from the input field to be received. We would use that value to construct our movie object and add it to the state of all movies. So to do so, I am going to say with the button, it's receiving another event called on click, right? So we have this on change, we have this on click, and it's going to be equal. It's going to be equal to a function which I've not yet declared. So let's say add movie. Okay, I will just copy this name, and then I can say const add movie is equal to an arrow function, right?
Yes.
Would you like to take it from here?
Okay, let me see. You know one thing? I I really need to see the code that I used to do
Okay.
uh, with the books.
No.
So, but right now I cannot watch it. But let me see if I'm really getting to it. So we are going to do this function, and
Mhm.
this function is going to add to the all movies
Mhm.
some data. And this
Yeah.
data it's going to be added thanks to this function.
Mhm.
So yes. So if you can a little bit
Okay.
more.
Okay, sure, no problem. So the first thing I want to do, because I'm adding a movie, I have multiple things I would have to do here. I would have to manipulate the all movie state. I would have to use the input field. Now the input field is not going to be enough to be added to the movie because we mentioned we're going to create an object representing the movie. So the first step, okay, I'm going to actually comment this out. So we're going to have step one, we're going to construct the movie object, okay? And it's going to be using the input field, sorry,
Yes.
input field. Step two, is where we're going to update the all movies state with the new movie, okay? Now, on step one, I'm going to simply create an object. So const an object. I'm going to give it two properties, the first being the title, and the second would be the is favorite. Okay. Now, the title, in this case, it's going to be equal the value inside the input field state. Okay. So this basic, sorry, const movie is an object. Sorry. Okay. So the title is going to be equal to the value inside our input field state, right? So if I typed Finding Nemo, then the title will actually be Finding Nemo. Now, is favorite at default, because I said it will be either true or false. True meaning that it is a favorite. Now, no movie added on the first time is actually favorite. You have to favorite it by yourself. So this is why I'm saying that the default value would be false, that it's not a favorite. So now that we have constructed the movie object, we can actually use this movie and add it to state, right? So there are two ways which I feel very comfortable with. I will first try to explain a complicated version so you can maybe understand an in-depth logic of this, and then we're going to simplify it. So the first version, first of all, when you have a state which has an array or an object, and you need to add something to the existing value of that state, you should never directly manipulate the state itself, right? So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to create a copy of our current state. So I'm going to say const copy of all movies, and this will be equal to an array. And here I'm using the spread operator to copy. And with the spread operator, I'm copying all of the movies from within our state. Now, at this point, it has none, but once you start adding movies, there'll be maybe two, three, maybe four, maybe even 15 movies. And this is why you have to copy them, because there's previous data which you have to add into. So now that I've created the copy of all movies, so this has to be a let because we are going to manipulate this value. Const is a constant, which you can't manipulate. So now that we've created the copy, I can simply say copy of all movies, and I'm going to say push the movie, which we've created right over here. Now, for those who don't know what push is, in my very first video, I've already explained where push simply adds something to the end of the array. Okay, so this is already an array. So pushing a movie would add it to the end of it. All right, so now that we have this newly manipulated array with the new data, let's set all movies with a copy that we've just created and pushed into, right? So now that we've set all movies, we would also want to make sure that we clear our input field. So we can say set input field. Actually, I want to show you why I'm doing this. So if I save, okay, and I go click here on app again. Now if I type a movie, so we have Finding Nemo, you can see when I do add movie, then we have this state is our input field, right? But this state has the object. Now you can see we have this object with the title Finding Nemo, which is not a favorite. Now, what about this? The input field is still there, still there. As a user, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I would keep on clicking. And notice what happens when I keep clicking. It keeps adding the same movie to the state. That's why I want to say that when I used the input field, okay, then I, after that, also would like to clear it. So set input field would be an empty string, right? So if I save this, and if I would actually say add movie, you could see it has added, but also cleared. So if now I say Shrek, add movie, so it adds one Shrek and clears the input field. Cool. But this is a whole bunch of lines. How can we simply do it in just one go? Well, as I mentioned, this was just to understand the logic of copying the existing state and adding the new item to it. But what we can do, so we can copy this array, which has the spread operator.
Mhm.
We can replace it here, so that's one line that we don't need anymore. And now we can simply take this movie that we're pushing, and then at the end of all movies, I'm going to add a comma with that movie. And now we don't need this line anymore. So that's it. So now if we save, we can do the very same where if I add the movie called Popeye, what is it with cartoons today? Huh?
Mm.
And then there we go.
So,
Popeye has still added to our new movies. Awesome.
so let me see if I can understand this. So we use the spread operator with the all movies,
Mhm.
and then with the movie, we are adding at the end the thing that is in the input field,
Mhm.
the state that is in the input field. And we should do this because of the principle of immutability. So we cannot change directly the thing. So we need to use this kind of code.
Exactly.
And later on with the set input field, once I just push this new data, it's clear, it gets cleared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So cool. So we have our input field. This is awesome. And we have our data. Now, what can we do with the data? Now, this is where we can actually render them out on the screen. Uh, Now, I was thinking of creating a component for this sake. So I'm going to go ahead and create a components folder. So this is components. And in that folder, I'm going to create a new file called all movies. Now, components, they start with the capital letters. They can be a JS file, they can be a JSX file, it really doesn't matter. For some reason, I prefer to use JSX because then my VS Code snippets work better than with .js. So by meaning VS Code snippets, this is the very example where I say RFC, and then I already have an export default function. Now I can also do RFCE and then would have the export default on the bottom. It really doesn't matter. It's the very same thing. So as I mentioned, we don't need to import React anymore, so we can remove that. And yeah, let's start with rendering out. So this all movies, the first thing that we're going to receive here, um, all movies, I think I'll do just a movie, like a single movie, and then we can just map through on the app because our state is an app. So I'll just rename the file to movie single, right? And there we go. Sorry for the delay, guys. Um, yeah, so here on the bottom, now I would like to have two lists, right? So I'm going to have one list which will have all of the movies, and the second list will be only the ones we've favorited. So to do this, I'm going to create a div at first. I'm going to give it a class name. I'm going to say that it is equal to um, app lists, as in multiple, and going to app.css, I'll use that same class name and simply say display flex. That's all. I just want them to be side by side, the two different lists. Okay, so now that we have that, we can target our all movies. We can now to write JavaScript within our JSX area, we need to open curly brackets, right? So now that I have curly brackets, I can target the all movie state and map through it. And I'm receiving within each map a movie, and this has to return something. So you can either do curly brackets and then return, or you can just do the regular brackets, which is what I prefer. Now, map receives three, uh, um, three parameters. The first one being the item from the array, the second one being the index of the current item, and the third one will be the actual array. So all movies would actually be this. The third parameter is almost never needed. Index in this case would not be needed. Actually, we would need it. I'll explain just in a moment. So that's it. We have the movie, we have the index, and yeah, we want to render out a movie. And this is where the movie component, which we've just created, will come in use. Now, this is a cool trick that Sonny has taught us. We can simply click Control Spacebar, and it would automatically import it on the top. So that's cool. Great. Now, why do I need this index? Uh, Usually, when we create an item, so in this case, we created a movie, it's important to add a field called ID, right? And the ID would be unique to that one item. So you can never use the same ID again. In this case, we did not use an ID. So when rendering out maps, you usually need a key. Okay, so for using a map, you need a key on the parent component. So if I had, let's say, a div wrapping this movie, then the key would not be on the movie, but it would actually be on the div, for example. But I'm not rendering out a div, it's unnecessary. So I'm simply going to say that the movie has a key. Now, because I don't have an ID, I'm going to use the index, okay? And I'm going to pass down the movie. Yeah, I'm just going to pass on the movie into the component. Now, this movie is simply the whole object, right? So both the title and favorite. Uh, if you want to have just a title, then you could say that the title is equal to the movie dot title. Or if you want the favorite, then you can do the very same. I'm just going to pass the whole movie into the component. Okay, so we have that. Uh, how can we actually create a favorites list? Well, this is something that we will do in just a moment. I want to finish constructing or creating this component. So now that we have movie, we are actually receiving from props. Okay, so we are receiving, we can either do props, and then we can say that, I don't know, the title for this case. Not going, yeah, I'll use a div for the title. No, I'm actually going to use an H4. That will be pretty small. And again, I'm going to open curly brackets so I can use JavaScript within my JSX. Now I could use props.movie.title, but then it has like this ugly and long syntax, right? So if you would have many props in your component, it would not look good. So we can simply say that instead of props, we would open curly brackets and deconstruct with the name that I already gave inside app. So this name, right? So this one right over here is this. Also to change the confusion, I'm going to rename this to item. So you can see that we are receiving the item from the map and the movie is equal to the item. Okay. So now uh, with here, I'm using movie because that's the prop name. So now I can simply say that movie.title will be my title. Awesome. Now if I render this, you can see it looks weird. The reason for that is because we did not style, sorry, this is display flex, right? So this over here, the app list has been displayed flex. We should actually change it to flex direction column, right? So that's one list of all
Mhm.
movies. And now what I can do is add another div under it with the same class name, which will be only for the favorites. So how do I render out just the favorites? In this case, I can say, so the all movies, I'll map through them, receiving again the item and the index. But then this time I can say, so I want just the items which are favorite. So only if item dot is favorite is true, right? Now this is ternary operators. Okay, so if I would say this, something is misspelled here. Could that be? No, just have to complete the yeah, okay. So there we go. So this is ternary operator. So what I'm doing is the item, we have the property called is favorite. Okay. Now when I do item is favorite question mark, this basically is a short way of asking if this is equal to true. And if it's true, it would return, okay, not to do, not run, but return. Okay. Ternary operators cannot assign values. They cannot do basic JavaScript. They can only return something. So it will return what's in here. Now this means else. So if item is favorite is not true, meaning false, it will return this. Now we don't need an empty string on our UI if there's no this is false, right? So we can even make this shorter by removing the question mark and saying and then we can remove the end of it, and then we simply have only if it's favorite, return this movie. That's it. So each time it starts looping, we would actually have the favorite movies, right?
Yeah, that's great. And this thing that you just did, it's a JavaScript, pure JavaScript, I think, with a Boolean operator. So if you want to do your code in a clean way,
Mm-hmm.
so you remove this and you just add the AND operator, and that's it. That's a
Yeah,
cool trick.
yeah, exactly, exactly. That keeps it very clean, and I like it. Um, Now, I do notice though we're going to have the all list and the favorite list one under each other. So I'm just going to create one more div, just for to wrap both of the lists. I'm going to give it a class name of app wrapper. I'm just going to call it wrapper, doesn't matter. And going back to the CSS, I'm just going to say that this one is the display flex that I had before, right? It's a bit unorganized, guys, but this is just, plain, we're, what's it called? Um, when something is spontaneous, you know what I mean? Anyway,
I
this
think
is,
I'm missing the double, this double underscore in the CSS file. App double underscore wrapper.
yeah, and it's also caps. That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, great.
Cool. So we have the movie title, right? But at this moment, all of our movies are unfavorite, right? So let me just refresh, guys, so we can start from new. Um, so if I would add a movie called, let's say, Shrek, right? So we mentioned that before, that it's all about cartoons today, and we have a
Yeah.
movie of Popeye. Uh, I have this issue where I'm fixated on caps lock. Right, so we have a movie of Popeye, and yeah, do you have any good movies?
Yeah, like I don't know, for example, it has to be a cartoon, isn't it?
Doesn't
I
have
don't
to.
know.
Cool.
I don't have kids, but
Cool.
maybe,
King Kong.
yeah,
King Kong, Titanic. There are plenty of movies. Awesome. So now how can I actually? I see just one list, right? And all these are all just looking in our state. These are all non-favorite, right? So I'll just add this title here on the top. So we'll have over here all movies, and then here we're going to have favorite movies, just to clarify things. Oh my god, that looks bad. I'm actually going to use um, I'm just going to put a little margin between them. So yeah, this thing from Zoom is bothering me. So the app list, I'm just going to say give it a margin, 0 from top to bottom, and let's say 15 pixel from the left and right. So there we go, that looks better.
hey, looks great.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Awesome. So how do we actually add one of these into the favorite movies using this Boolean? Now for that, we are going to use I'm going to use a checkbox, right? So the checkboxes are pretty cool. Um, what I'm going to do is before the title, I'm actually going to add an input of type checkbox. And if I save, you can see, oh, this looks bad. Let's also flex this one. So I'm just going to use the same class name. Guys, this is bad practice with the class names, but yeah, it's just to get things going as quick as possible. Right, so there we go. We have a checkbox right next to each and every name. So how can I actually favorite? Now, if you look closely to states, we have false, false, false. If I click, right, so this is checked, this is checked, but nothing actually happens. So this is where our logic will come in use right now on how to toggle this within the state of all the data. Okay, so let's do this. So we've already passed the movie, right, into the movie component, meaning that in the movie component, right now we have access to movie.title and movie.isFavorite. So we can do something cool. We can simply say here on the input checkbox, just going back here, I want to copy this. So we have this input field. So I'm going to copy, right? So you see the differences between both inputs. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to simply go here, paste it, right? So now the value of this checkbox is not going to be input field. It's going to be, sorry, it's not a value, but it's checked, right? And it's going to be equal to the movie dot is favorite, right? And if I would just comment out the on change for a second so you can see what happens. If I click, it doesn't even select it. Looking very closely, you can see a gray shadow popping for like a millisecond, but nothing happens because this is fixed to the false value of our current movie. So to actually change this, I'm going to uncomment this. So on change, and we can receive an event, but we don't really need the event at this case. So all I'm going to do is remove it. So we don't need the event anymore. And we don't need this set input field. So let me just quickly think of the logic. Um, Yes, okay. So what I'm going to do is when on change, all I want to do, I'm even going to cancel the arrow function. I'm simply going to create a function in the app component, okay, which will be passed to the movie via props. Why am I going to create this function in the app component? Sorry, guys, because our state is over here. So to use logic, which would manipulate this state, so these true and false, we have to have the function uh, in the same component, right? That's the easiest way. So let's just say that at this case, when on change, we are going to call the function with toggle favorite status. Okay, toggle favorite status. I'm going to copy this, pass it as one of the props, okay? And then with an app, I'm going to say that the all movies has this, right? And I'm going to also say that the favorite movies would have the very same, okay? Now, the toggle, I'm going to just use the very same name for the actual function. As you can see, it's marked red. It means it's not created yet. So to fix that, we're going to create the function over here. And would you want to take over from this point?
Okay, I just use this thing about changing or toggle to false to true to toggle a boolean, but with just plain inline CSS because
Oh,
that's the level that I'm in right now.
okay.
But I haven't used the checkbox function to
Mhm.
change, but I would love to see that.
Okay, okay, so let's do this. So first of all, this target favorite status. As I mentioned earlier, the first thing we have to do when updating our current state, we have to actually copy, right? So we have to copy the movie. So copy the state of movies. So I'm not going to if I would just do this, right, copy this and say, oh, so then let's target the movie and then changes. It does not work like this. Okay, this will be too complicated because we need to target an index within the array. And then once that index is targeted, then we have to change the Boolean status. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy copy of all movies is equal an array, and I'm using the spread operator on all movies as we did here previously before we actually cleaned up that line of code. Now, the copy of all movies, how do I know which movie to target in the state, right? Because this is just a function, a universal function. So for this, we can, when calling the function, we can actually pass a parameter to here. So in this case, I would simply open the brackets, okay? And I would say that I want this index, okay? If you would have an ID, okay, then it'd be better to find by ID, but we can also use the index. So I'm going to pass the index. I'm going to do the same for the favorite movies. I'm going to pass the index. And then here, I'm actually going to receive that very same index, right? So now whenever we click, okay, so whenever we click the checkbox, it will toggle, toggle this, okay, it will call this, which back in the app component, it will call it from this props, calling this function, passing the index received from our map, right? So now the index is over here, and I can simply say, um, what will be the easiest way to target? Um, okay, I'm actually going to go through a for loop just to remind you guys, in case some of you haven't seen the previous JavaScript videos I've released. So I'm going to create a for loop, which has three items which it needs. Just a second, I want to clean it up here, and then I'll explain. All right, so the for loop has, it first creates a variable, which this variable is being iterated at the end of every loop. Okay, so you can add one, you can reduct one. If you want, you can even add 150. You can really do whatever you want. It's just, this is a variable which is being iterated at the end of every loop. Now, this variable, as you can see, it is used to define when we stop the for loop. So in this case, as long as our I, as long as its value is less than the length of our array. Now, just to remind some of you guys, an array, it's indexed beginning at 0. So it starts with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So if, let's say, we had 5 movies, okay, 5 movies, I'll just do MOV for movie. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we have 5 movies, their index would actually be 0, 1, 2, 3, right, and 4. Okay, so this is what the array would look like: 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is actually 5 movies. So if our movie's length was 5, and the I starting at 0 would come to 4, at 4 means it's at the final loop. Okay, so it will do one more loop. At the end of it, it would add +1, meaning that now our I is equal 5, which is no longer less than the length. At this point, it is equal the length, right? Which basically stops it. So that means we are going to loop for such amount of times. Well, it's pretty dynamic, so I'm not, yeah, anyway, I hope you get the idea.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so now when looping, we can simply say that from within the copy of all movies, right? I think I've actually, no, 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 this is wrong. I was thinking of something else, guys. I'm very sorry. I was confused with a different project, a different idea. To target the index, there's no need for a for loop. We just say copy of all movies, target the index received from the function. Okay, so this means if copy of all movies is all of the movies, then copy of all movies at this index is that one movie that we targeted. So at this point, this means it's the one movie. And I want to say that it's dot is favorite, right? Because the movie has this is favorite. I want this to flip itself. So if it's false, it should be true. And if it's true, it should be false. I mean, if you would hard code it, you could simply say is true. That could be fine. I mean, if I would actually save this right now, not yet, we would have to first set all movies with a copy of all movies. So if I would save this right now, right? What happened? Too many renders, because this actually needs to be an arrow function. By the way, guys, this is very important. If you call a function, okay, inside JSX and it has no brackets at the end, it is fine. But once you open the brackets, okay, within JSX, it keeps on rendering, it keeps on calling itself. So to prevent that, all you have to do is say it's an arrow function calling this, okay? Which is why we see the arrow that we currently see on screen. So if I save this again, there we go. Now if we add, let's say Popeye again, Popeye or Titanic, right? And then if we would,
Superman.
yeah, and then if we would click Popeye, then cool, we have
Mhm.
Popeye on both all movies and favorite movies. But what if I want to unfavorite it? So if I click again, it would not work. Why? Because we simply said that this is equal to true. Okay, so I don't know, someone as myself who is new to React, I would simply say, okay, let's create another function, right? We would copy this and say false, right? And rename this to, I don't know, toggle to false, right? No, guys, we can reuse the same function dynamically. So if we said that this is that one movie, and this is the property of that one movie, we can copy this, replace it with true, okay? And then we can say at the front of it, a question exclamation mark. This means that this property of the movie is the opposite of itself. Okay, so now if I save this and I click, something is lagging. There we go. So now Popeye is favorite, Titanic is favorite, but I can also unfavorite them. Okay, cool. But what if I have a whole bunch of movies and I want only the unfavorite movies to be presented next to favorite movies? Then we can do the very same. Let's copy this, right? So if we said that this is all movies, this is favorite, and this is unfavorite movies,
Mhm.
if we said that item is favorite, only if it's true, render out the movie. Now we can say the opposite. Okay, so if item is not favorite, right? Exactly like this, right? So we use this exclamation mark, use it this also here. If we save again, and we can see we have three lists. I'm actually going to close my dev tools at the moment so we could see it better. So we have three lists, right? We can see we have all movies, favorite and unfavorite. Let's add a couple more. We have King Kong, right? We have King Kong. We have Avatar. Um, any,
Superman,
yeah, Superman, exactly. Uh,
Spider-Man.
Yeah, Marvel. That's the idea. Cool. So you can see that now every item in all movies is also an unfavored movies. So this kind of looks like, hey, well, why did we have to do this? Well, because simply if I favored Popeye, now we have it in favorites, but out of the unfavored movies. Because this is simply all movies, meaning both favorite and unfavorite. And here's where we actually filtered using this one Boolean flag, right? So if I would actually say King Kong is my favorite and Spider-Man is my favorite, then you can really see how it starts to dynamically change. Right. And this doesn't have to be just for favorites. It doesn't have to be just for movies. Okay. These can be emails. Okay. And this could be true or false for if read and unread. It could be um, anything you want. Anything you want.
So you're saying that maybe it's the same logic with the toggle function. It's the same logic to toggle the, the Boolean side.
Exactly, exactly. That's exactly the thing I'm saying right now. It's the exact same logic. So when trying to render out, okay, let's say favorites, favorite movies, or unread emails, or never opened gifts. I don't know. I'm just making things up right now. We can do it all by this very same logic. We have a flag of some sort. Okay, let's call this flag. Okay, so this flag could be representing the is favorite or unread, or sorry, or is read, or if is trash, or is unopened, or is opened. Anything you want it to be, you can simply define it with the very same logic where you have true or false, and then you have this one input, right? where in this case it's a checkbox, right? You can have a button, you can have this checkbox, you can add a little icon where you click on the icon, but eventually the logic would be that when you click on the item you choose to toggle the status, all it has to do is copy all the data because it's a must, okay? Target that one data with the index. In this case, it's an index. Best practice is to create IDs and use for loops to find the IDs, okay? Which is
Yeah,
why I was thinking of a for loop because my mind was set at the ID kind of concept, okay? So this is all you have to do. Just this, copy all data, target the one item, target its property, and have it be equal to the opposite of itself. Once that's done, you can update the data with the new data. And that's it, guys. Is there anything?
yeah. And for example, yes, we can use, for example, timestamp as a key.
Mm-hmm. Are you asking or saying
No, I'm asking.
if we can use timestamp as a key?
It will be different every
There
single iteration, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there are people who do use timestamps as a key. I personally do not recommend it because if, let's say, the ID was a timestamp, right, or even uh, if you would not even have the index, right, and you would simply say, so the key is new date, right? So you mean something like that. So key is new date. What's up with the caps? There we go. So
Mm.
you could do something like this. It's less recommended. Or if you would say, let's say the ID, right? So if you would create the movie where the ID is equal to new date, um, new date. There we go. So yeah, I see people lots of time do this, right? So they create the ID based on the date. I don't think this is good because just imagine, okay? Just imagine Facebook, maybe the biggest platform in the world, right? People are posting posts probably every second of the day, maybe multiple posts per second, right? Eventually, someone would have the very same timestamp as someone else in the world, meaning that that post and that post are have the exact same ID, and that's false, which is why you should never use timestamps as an ID.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for saying that. It's great.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, so would you like to add anything to this?
Oh, well, I think that, well, I was practicing this with just inline CSS, and right now I see it's awesome the way that you present the data. But yeah, well, and that's it. I think that for now
Mhm.
it's okay because it's the beginning. Maybe later we can add, for example, some price to the movies
Mhm.
and stuff like that. But right now, I think that this video is going to help me and help others to really understand uh, how the component works, how the props works, and how to do the logic inside each prop with use state.
Mhm.
Use state, I think it's a little bit complex, but with this exercise, I will do it again
Mhm.
by myself. And I think that with this exercise, it's a great way to learn and to understand more the underlyings of use state hook. The use state, it's a hook, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is in fact.
Yeah. So that's great. And maybe later on, we can add, or you can add, with use reducer, the persist data. But because right now, maybe if you refresh the page, it's all gone, isn't it?
Yeah, so if we refresh the page, we can see there are no movies left. Uh, Use reducer doesn't persist the data though. It's a state management tool provided by React hooks,
Oh yeah.
something that is pretty similar to Redux. If you do want to make the data persistent though, I think we can add this as a little cherry on the top of the ice cream for the end of this video.
Really?
Yeah, so well, let's say we have data we want to save when we refresh, right? And load that very same data. We can simply use local storage. Now, there are a few rules to local storage. You can store anything you want on local storage, Bear in mind, do not store sensitive information. So if you have any users with passwords, credit cards, maybe email addresses, uh, don't store those in local storage, okay? Other than that, any data can be stored. If you want to store objects and arrays, you would have to use JSON to stringify them and then again parse them when you retrieve them for local storage. And you have a maximum, a max limit of 5 MB per domain, right? So if you are using local storage for, let's say your domain is xmen.com, okay, then xmen has 5 MB of local storage. And if you have another website, spiderman.com, then spiderman.com can have another 5 MB of storage. So that's how it works. Now let's quickly dive into local storage. That could be actually a good idea. So um let's see, should we create another? I think I'll just keep it in the same file. It will look messy. It will look messy, that is true, but at least we will see how the data connects with one another. So the first thing I'm going to do is with useState, instead of receiving an empty array, I'm going to actually use the local storage to get any data that might already exist, okay? So I'm going to say local storage get item, okay? And it will receive one parameter when receiving an item, which is actually the key, okay? So if I would decide to keep all the movies under a key called movies of localhost, right? So let's say movies dash of localhost. Awesome, because localhost is my current domain. Cool. So it will find anything by this key. And if there's nothing existing, then we can say or an empty array, something to start with. So if there was no previous data, then we would simply load the empty array. Very cool. Now, as I mentioned, we have to parse it, right? So JSON parse, or yeah, I think it was to wrap everything inside a JSON. So I'm going to say JSON, all caps, dot parse, open brackets, and I'm going to close it at the end of local storage get item. Okay, so what this does, it simply parses what the string version data. So if our array or our objects, they were stringified when storing, then to retrieve them, we have to parse them. Okay, that's all it does. And now to automatically save to local storage, we can import another hook called useEffect, and I'm going to add it over here. And I'm simply going to say, well, useEffect receives two parameters. Okay, so it receives an arrow function. Well, what's this? There we go. So it receives an arrow function and it receives an array of sort. Okay, so the arrow function is where our useEffect logic will sit, and this array is our dependency array. So I want to say that each time the movies change, I want to save it immediately to local storage, right? So I'm simply going to copy this. I'm going to put it there. So now we know that each time this data changes, this use effect will run. Now, what will actually happen? How are we going to say if all the movies? We're simply going to say local storage, local storage. So if we had get item, now we're going to dot set item, and we're going to have two parameters. We're going to have the key. So this key, I'm going to copy it right over here. So that's the first parameter. And the second parameter is actually the data it wants to save. So if I said I want to save all movies, I add it there. But all movies is an array of objects. So local storage will not be able to save this. To save it, we have to, as we did here, we JSON parsed the whole local storage. So here, instead of parsing the whole local storage, we're going to uh, manipulate only the movies, and we're going to say json.stringify open brackets and close it at the end of the movies, and that's it. So now if I would save the file, if I would refresh, let's open DevTools just to see what's going on behind the scenes. So as we can see, we started our state with an empty array. Why? Because local storage has nothing yet inside this key. So that's why we said or an empty array, right? So now if I add a movie, and I would call it Iron Man, add movie, right? And if I refresh, then Iron Man is still there. And if I do Spider-Man,
Awesome.
yeah, and if I do Spider-Man, right, and I do Batman, right, and I would add, let's say, Titanic, right? So we have multiple movies. Let's refresh. The data is still there. Now, what if I would favorite some of them? So I'm favoriting Iron Man and Spider-Man. And yeah, let's keep it at that. Refresh. Even that data has been saved. And that was that
Wow.
easy. All you had to do was get the item, parse it, and set the data while stringifying it. That easy, guys.
Yeah, that's great, Ben. Thanks. I think that this is going to be helpful for me and for others to use the local storage. So I can storage some data, like for example, we are storing right now Boolean strings, and we have a limit of 5 MB.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
But if I'm adding, for example, images, I think that the images is going to do a little bit more. It's going to use more space if I store images, and maybe I will get to the roof. Maybe
Yeah,
I'm asking.
an image would be heavy for local storage, and I really don't think you can store an image at its default version. If anything, you would have to convert it to a base 64 encoded file, which that you can then stringify and then save. But then again, it would be too heavy on the local storage, would take up so much space. There would be actually no use for that. Really no
You
use.
know,
If
I mean one
anything,
thing.
you can store a link to the image. That would be better.
Ah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
link. That's a good idea.
yeah.
Yeah. And for example, I was thinking that perhaps this code I will do as a homework.
Mhm.
Maybe we can add a little bit more of components just to
Make the
do it in separate ways.
yeah,
Don't you think? It could
yeah,
be a good homework to
yeah.
do this, to take this code and then try to simplify the code
Hmm.
with more components. Like for example, we can make some components with for the, I don't know, I'm asking you, for
Hmm.
the ad movie, for example, we can do some isolated component for the ad movie. Am
Hmm.
I right?
Yeah, so for the ad movie, you can create an isolated component. Just remember that the value on change and on click, they manipulate states which sit inside app.js. So if you would create a separate component for these two, remember to pass any of the required values, add movie input field and set input field, as props. That
Apps
is
props.
important. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
So this could be a component. The all movies list could be a component. The favorites movies could be a component. This could be a component. You could really simplify the way your app looks using components. Of course, you can even, maybe even if you want to take on a challenge, you can use one component for all three lists and via props filter the data. You can even try that. It's possible, maybe a bit difficult beginning, but it's definitely possible. I also just want to show one more thing before we wrap things up. I just remembered when using local storage, you have the option in, I don't know if all browsers, but most browsers, you can actually view the data in local storage. So if you click here, in this case, for Firefox, I'm clicking on storage. Then you can see I've cached, cookies, index, local storage, and session storage. If I go to local storage, click on the current domain, then you can actually see I have this item with the key of movies of localhost, which has this value, Okay, now it looks like an array of objects because that's what our data is, but it's just a stringified version of an array of objects. Okay, yeah, so that's it. So even if you would, let's say, want to remove data from local storage, you can actually use a command called remove item. So if we have set item, then you can also do remove item with the key. But you can also come here to your dev tools, right click. Oh, it's on Chrome, right click. Oh, there it is. So then we can simply say delete movies and it would delete the data. So just a useful tip.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. That's great. Well, I think that we have a lot of things to study from now on with this video,
Mm-hmm.
at least for myself and another students who are at the beginning level. And thanks, Ben.
You're welcome.
This is really, really, really helpful, at least for me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'll see you guys in Slack. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.